When I finally said I was tired and wanted to move out, she laughed in my face and said, "Good luck finding anywhere else to go at your age, Eleanor." What Victoria didn't know was that the house she'd been treating like her personal palace was actually mine, and I was about to prove that underestimating a 70-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of her life. It all began on a rainy October morning in 1998. I was 47 years old, recently widowed, and still reeling from the loss of my husband James, who had passed away suddenly from a heart attack just 6 months earlier. The house felt impossibly large and empty without him. Our 4-bedroom colonial in Maplewood Heights that we'd bought when Marcus was just a toddler, planning to fill it with more children who never came. Marcus was 24 then, fresh out of college with a business degree and stars in his eyes about starting his own consulting firm. He'd been dating Victoria Chen for 2 years, a petite, sharp-tongued marketing coordinator who worked for a local advertising agency. Victoria had a way of making everything sound like a favor she was doing for you, even when she was asking for help. "Mom," Marcus had said that morning, standing in my kitchen with Victoria beside him, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on my granite countertop. "We have something to ask you, and I hope you'll consider it carefully." Victoria stepped forward before Marcus could continue. "Eleanor, we know you've been lonely since Dad passed, and this big house must feel overwhelming for just one person." Her tone was syrupy sweet, the kind of voice people use when they're about to ask for something significant. "We were thinking, what if we moved in here temporarily? Just until we get our feet under us financially. Marcus is starting his business, and my salary alone won't cover a decent apartment and his startup costs." I remember looking between them, seeing the hope in Marcus's eyes and something else in Victoria's, a calculating coldness that I chose to ignore at the time. "Temporarily?" I asked. 6 months, maybe a year at most," Victoria said quickly. "Just until the business takes off. We'd help with expenses, of course, and I could help you around the house. It would be perfect. You wouldn't be alone, and we'd all save money." The truth was, I had been lonely. The silence in the house was deafening, and the thought of having family around, of hearing laughter and conversation in the rooms again, was appealing. James had left me comfortable financially. The house was paid off, and his life insurance policy had been generous, but money doesn't fill the emotional void. "Help around the house?" I asked Victoria. She smiled brightly. "Absolutely. Cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. I love taking care of people." That should have been my first warning. But I was grieving, lonely, and wanted to help my son succeed. So I said yes. Patch. They moved in the following weekend with what seemed like a modest amount of belongings. Victoria had insisted they take the master bedroom. Since there are 2 of us, it just makes sense. Which meant I moved my things to the smaller guest room down the hall. My bedroom, where James and I had shared 23 years of marriage, became theirs. The first few months weren't terrible. Victoria did help with some cooking, though she had very specific ideas about what constituted proper meals. She'd critique my recipes that had been family favorites, suggesting improvements that usually involved more expensive ingredients or complicated techniques she'd seen on cooking shows. "Eleanor, you really should try making this with organic free-range chicken instead," she'd say, holding up a package that cost 3 times what I usually spent. "And saffron would really elevate the flavor profile." Marcus was working 18-hour days trying to get his consulting business off the ground, which meant Victoria and I were alone together most of the time. I began to notice little things, how she'd leave her coffee cup on the counter every morning, instead of putting it in the dishwasher, how she'd use my expensive skincare products without asking, how she'd rearrange my kitchen cabinets for better efficiency without consulting me. When I gently mentioned these things, Victoria would laugh and say, "Oh, Eleanor, you're so particular about everything. We're family now. What's yours is ours, right?" The 6 months came and went. Then a year. Victoria got pregnant with their first child, Emma, and suddenly moving out was, quote, impossible because they needed to save money for the baby. I found myself not just sharing my home, but becoming the primary caregiver preparation coordinator. "You have so much experience with babies," Victoria would say, though I'd only raised 1 child 24 years earlier. "And you'll have so much more time to bond with your granddaughter this way." When Emma was born, I fell in love instantly. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, button nose, and the most beautiful dark hair that caught the light like silk. But I quickly realized that Victoria's version of motherhood involved a lot of delegation. "Could you take the 2 a.m. feeding?" Victoria would ask, handing me the baby. "I need my sleep for work." Never mind that I was the one who'd been up during the 11 p.m. feeding, too. "Eleanor, could you handle the diaper change? You're so much faster at it than me." "Eleanor, could you rock her back to sleep? She seems to prefer you anyway." By the time Emma was 6 months old, I was essentially her primary caregiver. Victoria would sweep in for the cute moments. The first smile, the adorable bath time photos for social media. But the middle of the night crying, the endless diaper changes, the feeding schedule, all fell to me. Marcus was oblivious, working constantly and genuinely grateful for what he saw as my generous help with his daughter. When he was home, Victoria played the doting mother perfectly, which made my complaints seem petty and ungrateful. "Mom, I can't thank you enough for everything you're doing," Marcus would say, watching Victoria coo over Emma during one of her brief appearances in the nursery. "You're giving Emma such a wonderful start in life." 2 years later, Victoria was pregnant again, with twins this time, Jake and Sophie. "It's like fate," she declared. "Now Emma will have siblings close in age, and you'll have 3 grandchildren to spoil." With 3 children under 3 in the house, my role evolved from grandmother to full-time childcare provider. Victoria had negotiated a work-from-home arrangement that mostly involved her taking calls from the converted den, while I managed 3 toddlers. "Could you keep them quiet during my client calls?" became her daily request, as if children under 3 had volume controls. I found myself getting up at 5:30 a.m. to prepare bottles and breakfast, managing nap time schedules for 3 different children, planning and preparing all meals, and handling the endless laundry that comes with small children. Victoria would emerge from her office around 4 p.m., usually just in time to take photos of the children looking clean and happy for her Instagram account. Her captions always made me smile bitterly. "Blessed to be working from home so I can spend every moment with my babies. #momlife, #workingmom, #blessed." The comments would pour in. "You make it look so easy. Such a hands-on mom. Your children are so lucky." If only they knew that the hands-on mom spent most of her day in conference calls while I changed diapers, mediated toddler conflicts, and sang lullabies. The house itself began to change too. Victoria had strong opinions about decor, and gradually my family photos were replaced with her preferred modern art pieces. My grandmother's antique china cabinet was moved to the basement because it, quote, didn't fit the aesthetic. The cozy, lived-in feeling that James and I had cultivated over decades was replaced with something that looked like a magazine spread. Beautiful, but cold. "I hope you don't mind," Victoria would say after each change, "but I thought this would look so much better. You want the house to look its best, don't you?" By year 5, we'd established a routine that would define the next 2 decades of my life. I was the invisible force that kept the household running. I did the grocery shopping, meal planning, and cooking. I handled all the children's medical appointments, school pickups, homework supervision, and extracurricular activities. I managed the household calendar, remembered birthdays, bought gifts, and planned celebrations. Victoria's work schedule had evolved into something remarkably flexible. She had client calls in the mornings, lunch meetings several times a week, and networking events in the evenings. Somehow, she was always the one with important obligations that prevented her from handling any of the domestic responsibilities. "I wish I could help more," she'd say with a perfectly practiced sigh. "But you know how demanding my job is. The kids are so lucky to have such a devoted grandmother." Marcus's business had finally taken off by year 7, and they were more financially stable than ever. I thought perhaps this would be when they'd start looking for their own place. Instead, Victoria announced they were planning to renovate the house. "Since we're all so happy here," she said, "why not make it perfect for our growing family?" The renovations were extensive and expensive. A new master bathroom, expanded kitchen, finished basement playroom. Victoria managed every detail, making decisions about my house as if it were her own. When I expressed concerns about certain choices, she'd smile patronizingly and say, "Trust me, Eleanor, I have an eye for these things. When we're done, this place will be absolutely stunning." The renovations took 8 months, during which we all lived in construction chaos. I coordinated with contractors, managed schedules, and somehow kept 3 school-age children fed and on routine, while living in what felt like a perpetual construction zone. Victoria spent most of this period staying at a friend's house, claiming she was too sensitive to construction dust and noise. When it was finished, the house was beautiful and completely unrecognizable as the home James and I had shared. Every surface was new, every room reconfigured to Victoria's specifications. It felt like living in someone else's house, which, I was beginning to realize, was exactly what was happening. Year 10 brought new challenges. Emma was now in middle school, and the twins were in elementary school. Their activities had multiplied exponentially. Soccer, piano lessons, art classes, birthday parties every weekend. I had become a full-time chauffeur, schedule coordinator, and homework supervisor. Victoria had been promoted to regional marketing director, a role that required frequent travel. "It's such a wonderful opportunity," she'd explained during her goodbye hugs, "and I know the children are in the best possible hands with you." These business trips grew more frequent and longer. Sometimes she'd be gone for a week, leaving me to manage 3 children's complete schedules alone. When she returned, she'd bring small gifts and stories about fancy restaurants and hotels, while I'd hand over detailed reports about homework assignments, upcoming school events, and any behavioral issues that had arisen. "You're such a natural at this," she'd say, reviewing my handwritten notes. "I don't know how you keep track of everything." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become more of a mother to her children than she was, while she got to enjoy the fun parts, the recognition at school events, the praise from other parents for having such well-behaved, organized children, the pride in their achievements. By year 15, I realized that my temporary house guests had become permanent residents, and I had become the unpaid staff. The children, now teenagers, saw me as their primary caregiver but still called Victoria Mom, and treated her like the authority figure during her brief moments of parental engagement. Victoria had perfected the art of selective availability. She was always present for the big moments, school plays, graduation ceremonies, awards banquets, where she could shine as the proud mother. But the daily grind of teenage parenting, the driving to friends' houses, the late-night conversations about problems, the endless load of laundry and meal preparation, all fell to me. "Eleanor is so good with them," Victoria would tell other parents at school events. "They're incredibly close. She's like a second mother to them." Second mother. The phrase stung every time because it was simultaneously true and false. I was doing all the work of being their mother, but Victoria got all the credit and authority. The children themselves had begun to treat me like a combination grandmother/housekeeper. They'd thank Victoria for things I'd done, meals I'd cooked, rides I'd provided, problems I'd solved. When they needed permission for something important, they'd ask Victoria, even if I was the one who'd been managing their schedules all week. It was around year 18 that I first started feeling my age. I was 65, and the constant caregiving was taking a physical toll. My back ached from years of carrying children, then laundry baskets, then groceries. My feet hurt from standing in the kitchen for hours each day. I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But whenever I mentioned feeling worn down, Victoria would express concern in that practiced way of hers. "Oh, Eleanor, you should take better care of yourself. Maybe you should see a doctor about that back pain. Are you taking your vitamins?" Never an offer to help, just suggestions for how I could better manage my declining health while maintaining my full schedule of caring for her family. The children were all in high school now, and while they were more independent, their needs had actually become more complex. Emma was applying to colleges, which meant endless research, campus visits, and application deadlines to track. The twins were involved in multiple sports and activities, each with their own complicated schedules and equipment needs. Victoria's career had reached new heights. She was now a vice president with the company, traveling internationally, and attending high-profile conferences. Her social media had evolved into a professional brand, with carefully curated posts about work-life balance and successful parenting. "The secret," she'd written in a post that went viral, is having a strong support system and clear priorities. I'm blessed to have family that shares my values and commitment to raising wonderful children. The comments were full of admiration. You're such an inspiration. How do you do it all? Goals. I read these posts from my phone while folding her laundry, and I felt something inside me harden a little more each time. Year 20 brought Emma's high school graduation and college departure. I had been the one to help her with every application, to drive her to every campus visit, to shop for everything she needed for her dorm room. But in all the graduation photos, Emma was hugging Victoria, thanking Victoria, crying about leaving Victoria. I'm going to miss you so much, Mom, Emma said at the graduation party Victoria had planned, and I had executed. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Victoria beamed and hugged her daughter. You're going to do amazing things, sweetheart. I'm so proud of the young woman you've become. I stood in the background, watching this moment I'd helped create but wasn't really part of. Emma did give me a hug later, a sweet one, but it felt different. Grateful, but distant. Like thanking a helpful teacher rather than saying goodbye to someone who'd raised you. Years 21 through 25 blended together in a blur of managing the twins' increasingly complex teenage lives, while my own energy continued to decline. Victoria's success had reached the point where she was being featured in business magazines and speaking at conferences about leadership and work-life integration. The key to success, she told one interviewer, is knowing your strengths and building a team around your weaknesses. I'm excellent at strategy and vision, but I'm smart enough to surround myself with people who excel at execution and daily management. People who excel at execution and daily management. That's how she described me to the world. Not as family, not as Marcus's mother who'd opened her home out of love, but as part of her team. The twins graduated from high school when I was 72. Jake was headed to State University for engineering, and Sophie had been accepted to a prestigious art school across the country. I had been their primary support system through high school, the one who drove them to SAT prep, helped them through friendship drama, stayed up late reviewing college essays. At their graduation party, I overheard Victoria talking to another parent about their college plans. It's bittersweet, she was saying. Marcus and I have put so much energy into raising them well, and now they're ready to fly on their own. It's been such a rewarding journey. Marcus and I, not Eleanor and Marcus and I, not we had help from Eleanor. Marcus and I, as if I'd been invisible for 25 years. That night, after the party cleanup was finished and everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my small bedroom, the guest room I'd been living in for a quarter century, and took a hard look at my life. I was 72 years old. I had spent the last 25 years raising someone else's children in my own house, cooking in my own kitchen for people who saw me as hired help, cleaning my own home for people who took my labor for granted. The children were grown and leaving. Victoria and Marcus were successful and financially stable. There was no reason they needed to live in my house anymore, except that it was convenient for them and profitable for me to continue serving as their unpaid domestic staff. For the first time in 25 years, I started thinking about what I wanted for my remaining years. I was healthy despite my aches and pains. I had interests I'd abandoned. Painting, gardening, traveling to places James and I had always planned to visit. I had friends I'd lost touch with because I'd been too busy managing someone else's family. Dead neuf, I realized I'd been living as a guest in my own life for 25 years. And Victoria's casual comment about having a team to handle execution and daily management had crystallized something I'd been trying not to see. I wasn't family to her. I was staff. Useful, dependable, unpaid staff who came with the house. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for the temporary arrangement to finally end. It was time for me to reclaim my home and my life. What I didn't know was that Victoria had very different ideas about my future, and her response to my decision would reveal just how little she actually thought of me. 25 years of sacrifice were about to come to a head, and the sweet, grateful daughter-in-law I thought I knew was about to show her true colors in the most devastating way possible. The morning after the twins' graduation party, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. As I lay in my small bedroom, the guest room that had been my prison for 25 years, I listened to the sounds of my own house awakening around me. Victoria's alarm going off in the master bedroom, the shower running in the bathroom that used to be mine, Marcus's heavy footsteps as he got ready for another day of the successful business I'd helped make possible by managing his entire domestic life. For the first time in decades, I didn't immediately jump out of bed to start breakfast preparations. Instead, I stayed under the covers and really listened to my house, thinking about how every sound represented another way I'd been erased from my own life. When I finally went downstairs at 7:30 a.m., a full hour later than usual, Victoria was standing in the kitchen with her hands on her hips, looking dramatically inconvenienced. "There you are," she said, not quite hiding her irritation. "I was wondering where breakfast was. I have an important client call at 8, and I really need to eat something substantial beforehand." I looked at her standing in my kitchen, in her expensive silk blouse and perfectly applied makeup, waiting for me to serve her like I was hotel staff. "You could have made yourself something," I said mildly. Victoria's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Eleanor, you know I don't cook. That's always been your thing. Besides, you make everything so much better than I ever could." That phrase, "that's always been your thing," hit me like a physical blow. As if cooking, cleaning, and childcare were hobbies I'd chosen rather than responsibilities that had been dumped on me. As if I'd volunteered to spend 25 years as an unpaid domestic worker in my own home. "Right," I said quietly, moving toward the refrigerator. "My thing." As I prepared her usual elaborate breakfast, steel-cut oats with fresh berries, organic Greek yogurt, French press coffee, Victoria scrolled through her phone, occasionally making appreciative sounds about whatever professional accolades she was reading about herself. "Oh, this is wonderful," she said, showing me her screen. "The conference I spoke at last month just published an article about successful women in marketing, and I'm featured prominently. Listen to this quote. Victoria Chen Morrison has mastered the art of work-life balance, successfully raising 3 accomplished children while building an impressive career. Her secret, she says, is having a strong family foundation and excellent time management skills." Excellent time management skills. I almost dropped the coffee pot. Her time management skills consisted of delegating every domestic responsibility to me so she could focus entirely on her career and social life. "That's nice," I managed to say, setting her breakfast in front of her. "Nice?" Victoria looked up from her phone with a frown. "Eleanor, this is a major industry publication. This kind of recognition could lead to speaking opportunities, board positions, consulting contracts. It's actually quite significant." The corrections stung. Even my responses weren't adequate anymore. I wasn't enthusiastic enough about her success that had been built on my invisible labor. After Victoria left for her office, I found myself doing something I rarely did anymore. I sat down. Not to fold laundry or plan meals or organize schedules, but just to sit in my own living room and look around. The space was beautiful, I had to admit. Victoria had excellent taste, and the renovations she'd directed had created a magazine-worthy home. But as I sat there, I realized I couldn't find a single trace of the life James and I had built together. Our wedding photo had been moved to a small side table in the corner, overwhelmed by larger, more prominent family photos of Victoria, Marcus, and the children. The Afghan my mother had crocheted was nowhere to be seen, probably packed away in the basement with all the other reminders of my previous life. Even the kitchen, where I spent most of my time, had been designed for Victoria's preferences. The color scheme, the appliances, the layout. Everything reflected her taste, not mine. I was a worker in someone else's house that happened to have my name on the deed. That afternoon, when Victoria returned from her client meetings, she found me still sitting in the living room, which apparently struck her as unusual. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, setting down her designer handbag and looking at me with what might have been concern if I didn't know her better. "You seem off today. And I noticed you didn't prepare anything for lunch. I had to grab something on the way back from my meeting." "I'm fine," I said. "Just thinking." "Thinking about what?" I considered telling her the truth, that I was thinking about how I'd spent 25 years being taken for granted, how I'd become invisible in my own life, how I was tired of being treated like hired help. Instead, I said, "Just thinking about changes." Victoria's expression shifted subtly, and I caught a glimpse of something calculating in her eyes. "What kind of changes?" "Well, the children are grown now. Jake and Sophie will be leaving for college in the fall. Emma's already established in her own life. Maybe it's time for some adjustments around here. The word adjustments seemed to trigger something in Victoria. She sat down across from me, her posture suddenly more attentive. What do you mean by adjustments? I took a breath, trying to phrase this diplomatically. Victoria, when you and Marcus first moved in, it was supposed to be temporary. The children needed stability then, but now they're adults. Maybe it's time to think about other arrangements. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see her mind working, calculating, figuring out how to respond to this unexpected challenge to the status quo. Finally, she laughed. Not a amused laugh, but something sharper. Other arrangements? Eleanor, what are you talking about? This is our home. The children grew up here. Marcus built his business while living here. We've invested 25 years of our lives in this place. You've invested 25 years in this place, I corrected gently. But it's my place, my house. Victoria's laugh became more pronounced, almost hysterical. Your house? Eleanor, come on. Yes, technically the deed might still be in your name, but let's be realistic about who's actually invested in this property. We've paid for renovations, improvements, maintenance. We've made this house what it is today. The audacity of that statement took my breath away. They'd lived rent-free for 25 years, while I paid property taxes, insurance, and utilities. The renovation she was claiming credit for had been paid for with money from Marcus's business, a business that had succeeded largely because I'd handled every domestic responsibility, allowing him to work unlimited hours without worrying about childcare, meals, or household management. Victoria, you haven't paid rent in 25 years, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Rent? Victoria's voice rose. Eleanor, we're family. This isn't some landlord-tenant relationship. We've been taking care of each other. You've had company, help around the house, family to care for. We've had stability and support. It's been mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial. As if my 25 years of unpaid labor were equivalent to their company. I've been taking care of you, I said quietly. All of you. For 25 years. Victoria's expression shifted again, and now there was something almost pitying in her eyes. Eleanor, is this about feeling unappreciated? Because if it is, I want you to know how grateful we are for everything you do. You're an integral part of this family. An integral part. Like a useful appliance. I want you to think very carefully about what you're suggesting, Victoria continued, her tone becoming more serious. You're 72 years old. Living alone in a house this size would be overwhelming. The maintenance, the upkeep, the isolation. It wouldn't be healthy for you. And frankly, it wouldn't be practical either. Do you really want to spend your golden years rattling around in an empty house, struggling with basic maintenance issues? There it was, the subtle threat wrapped in fake concern. I was too old, too incompetent, too isolated to manage without them. Plus, Victoria added, warming to her theme, think about the children. This is the only home Jake and Sophie have ever known. You'd be disrupting their final summer before college, forcing them to pack up their childhood memories. And what about holidays? Where would we gather? This house is the center of our family traditions. Family traditions that I had created and maintained, while Victoria took credit. And Marcus, she continued. This would be devastating for him. This house represents everything he's worked for, everything we've built together. You'd be pulling the rug out from under your own son's feet. I felt my resolve beginning to waver. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being selfish and impractical. Maybe this really would hurt Marcus and the children. Polite. But then Victoria made a crucial mistake. She overplayed her hand. Look, Eleanor, I understand you might be feeling a little displaced now that the children are grown. It's natural for women your age to go through this kind of identity crisis when their caregiving role diminishes. But the solution isn't to blow up everyone's life. The solution is to find new ways to feel useful and needed. Identity crisis. Women your age. Find new ways to feel useful. The condescension in her voice was so thick I could practically taste it. This wasn't concern for my well-being. This was damage control. Victoria had built her perfect life on my foundation, and now she was scrambling to keep me in place to maintain it. I don't need to feel useful, I said, standing up. I need to feel like I'm living my own life instead of serving yours. Victoria's mask slipped completely. Serving mine? Eleanor, that's incredibly unfair. We're a family. Families help each other. You've never complained before about any of the arrangements. Because I thought it was temporary. The words came out louder than I'd intended. 25 years ago, you said 6 months. Maybe a year. You said you'd help around the house. You said it would be mutually beneficial. What it became was me working as your unpaid housekeeper, nanny, and cook while you built a career and took credit for raising children I actually raised. Victoria's face flushed red. That is completely unfair, and you know it. I have always been present for my children. I've been at every important event, every milestone. Because I handled everything else, I interrupted. I did the midnight feeding so you could sleep. I drove them to school so you could have morning meetings. I helped with homework so you could travel for work. I managed their schedules, their activities, their problems, their daily lives. You showed up for the photo opportunities. How dare you, Victoria said, her voice low and dangerous. How dare you minimize my role in my children's lives? I have worked incredibly hard to balance my career and motherhood, and I have made countless sacrifices. What sacrifices? I asked. Name one thing you've sacrificed. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, she looked genuinely stumped. I've sacrificed advancement opportunities that would have required more travel, she said finally. I've turned down positions that would have meant relocating. I've structured my entire career around being available for my family. You've structured your career around me being available for your family, I corrected. Every opportunity you took, every business trip, every late meeting, every weekend conference, you could do all of that because you knew I was here handling everything else. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalibrating, trying a different approach. Eleanor, she said, her voice softening, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. This isn't like you at all. You've always been so generous, so giving. I'm worried about you. Maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or a doctor. Sometimes hormonal changes in older women can cause these kinds of emotional disruptions. Hormonal changes in older women. She was literally trying to gaslight me into thinking my perfectly reasonable desire to reclaim my own life was a medical condition. I'm not having a breakdown, I said firmly. I'm having a realization. What kind of realization? That I've been living as a guest in my own life for 25 years, and I'm too old to waste whatever time I have left. Victoria's expression hardened again. So what exactly are you proposing? That Marcus and I should just pack up and leave the only home our children have ever known? That we should uproot our entire lives because you're having some sort of existential crisis? I'm proposing that 3 adults who've been living rent-free in my house for 25 years might consider finding their own place, yes. Eleanor, be realistic. Do you have any idea what housing costs are like now? We couldn't afford anything comparable to this house. You'd be forcing us into a significant downgrade in our quality of life. The entitlement in that statement was breathtaking. I'd be forcing them into a downgrade from the free mansion I'd been providing. Victoria, you're a successful marketing executive. Marcus runs a profitable consulting business. You can afford your own home. Not like this one, Victoria said flatly. Not in this neighborhood. Not with these amenities. Eleanor, you'd be destroying everything we've worked for. You've worked for? Or everything I've provided for? Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. Fine, she snapped. You want to play the property ownership card? Let's talk about property ownership. This house is worth probably twice what it was when we moved in. Who do you think is responsible for that increase in value? The renovations we funded, the improvements we made, the care we've taken of this place. We've essentially been paying you in home improvement instead of rent. I stared at her in disbelief. You funded renovations with money Marcus made because I handled all his domestic responsibilities. You improved a house you were living in for free. You took care of a place you never paid for. And now you're claiming that gives you ownership rights? I'm claiming it gives us some say in major decisions that affect our lives, Victoria shot back. You can't just unilaterally decide to destroy our family's stability because you're feeling sorry for yourself. Feeling sorry for myself. 25 years of unpaid labor was self-pity. Where would we even go? Victoria continued, playing the victim now. How would we explain to Jake and Sophie that they can't come home for Christmas because Grandma decided she didn't want us here anymore? How would we maintain the family traditions that are so important to all of us? You'd figure it out, I said, the same way every other adult family figures it out. Victoria stared at me as if I'd suggested something completely unreasonable, like asking her to build a rocket ship. This is insane, she said finally. Eleanor, you're talking about breaking up our family over what? Some abstract notion that you're not appreciated enough? I tell you all the time how grateful we are for everything you do. Grateful enough to pay me? The question hung in the air between us. Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times. Pay you? She repeated. Eleanor, you're family. You don't pay family for helping out. Helping out is babysitting occasionally. Helping out is cooking dinner once in a while. What I've been doing is full-time domestic work, childcare, and household management. If you hired someone to do everything I do, it would cost you at least $60,000 a year. Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced now. That's ridiculous. You're not a hired employee, you're Marcus's mother. This is your family too. You love those children as much as we do. And there it was, the emotional manipulation I'd been waiting for. Of course I loved the children. I'd raised them. But love didn't negate the fact that I'd been providing free labor while Victoria built her career on my back. I do love them, I said, but that doesn't mean I should spend the rest of my life being your unpaid domestic staff. Domestic staff? Victoria's voice rose again. Is that really how you see yourself? Because that's incredibly sad, Eleanor. We see you as family. We see you as an irreplaceable part of our lives. Irreplaceable because I worked for free. If I'm so irreplaceable, I said, maybe you should consider paying me market rate for my services. Victoria stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. Eleanor, you can't be serious. You live here rent-free. You eat the food we buy. The food I buy, I corrected, with my money, from my grocery budget. Victoria paused, clearly not having thought about who actually paid for the groceries I prepared every day. Fine, she said. But you live here rent-free. That's worth something. I live in the guest bedroom of my own house, I said. The house I own, that you've been living in rent-free for 25 years. We stared at each other across my living room. The living room she'd redecorated to her taste in my house, and I could see her mind working frantically, trying to find a new angle of attack. What about Marcus? She asked finally. What does he think about this plan of yours? I realized I hadn't actually talked to Marcus about any of this yet. I haven't discussed it with him. Victoria's face lit up with something like triumph. So you're making unilateral decisions about his living situation without even consulting him? Eleanor, that's not fair to your own son. She was right about that, and we both knew it. I needed to talk to Marcus before this went any further. I'll talk to him, I said. Good, Victoria said, her confidence returning. Because I think you'll find that Marcus has a very different perspective on this situation. He values family stability. He understands how important it is for the children to have consistency. And he appreciates everything we've all built together here. Everything we've all built. As if she and Marcus had been equal partners in creating the foundation that supported their entire lives. We'll see, I said. Victoria nodded, clearly convinced that Marcus would side with her. Yes, we will. And Eleanor? I really do think you should consider talking to a professional about these feelings you're having. Sometimes retirement and aging can trigger depression or anxiety that makes people want to make drastic changes. It's very common. With that final insult, suggesting that my desire for independence was a mental health issue, Victoria picked up her handbag and headed toward the stairs. I'm going to freshen up before Marcus gets home, she said over her shoulder. Maybe you could start dinner. I know he's had a stressful day, and coming home to one of your wonderful meals always makes everything better. And just like that, she expected me to go back to my role as the family cook, as if our entire conversation had been a minor disagreement, rather than me announcing my intention to reclaim my own life. I stood in my living room for a long time after she went upstairs, thinking about everything that had just happened. Victoria's response had been even worse than I'd expected. The dismissiveness, the condescension, the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting. It was like seeing 25 years of subtle disrespect condensed into one terrible conversation. But what struck me most was her complete inability to understand why I might want my own life back. To Victoria, I existed to serve her family's needs. The idea that I might have my own desires, my own plans, my own dreams for my remaining years was literally incomprehensible to her. I was an appliance that had suddenly started malfunctioning, and her solution was to have me repaired rather than considering that maybe the appliance had been overused. As I walked toward the kitchen to start dinner, because Marcus did deserve to eat, and 25 years of habit are hard to break, I found myself thinking about the conversation I needed to have with my son. Would Marcus side with Victoria? Would he see me as an ungrateful mother destroying the family's stability? Or would he understand that his 72-year-old mother might want to live for herself for whatever years she had left? I was about to find out. And depending on his response, I was either going to have a difficult but manageable transition, or I was going to have to take more drastic action than I'd ever imagined. What I didn't know yet was just how far Victoria was willing to go to protect her comfortable life built on my labor. The conversation we'd just had was only the beginning of her campaign to keep me in my place. And her next moves would be so cruel, so calculated, and so devastating that they would change everything about how I saw our relationship and what I was willing to do about it. Marcus came home that evening at his usual time, 7:30 p.m., just as dinner was finishing up in the oven. I heard his key in the front door, followed by the familiar sounds of him setting down his briefcase and hanging up his jacket in the entryway closet. For 25 years, these sounds had signaled the start of our family dinner routine, but tonight they filled me with an anxiety I hadn't expected. "Something smells amazing," Marcus called out as he headed toward the kitchen, following the same pattern he'd established decades ago. "What are we having tonight?" I was pulling a pan of herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables from the oven. One of his favorites, though I wondered now if I'd chosen it subconsciously as a peace offering before our difficult conversation. "Salmon with those Brussels sprouts you like," I replied, trying to keep my voice normal while my heart hammered in my chest. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie with one hand while checking his phone with the other. At 49, he still looked remarkably like the young man who'd brought Victoria home all those years ago. The same dark hair, though now threading with silver. The same earnest brown eyes, the same habit of multitasking even during family time. "Perfect," he said, finally putting his phone aside to give me his attention. I had back-to-back client meetings all day, and I think I survived on nothing but coffee and determination. I felt a familiar pang watching him. Marcus worked incredibly hard, and part of me genuinely admired what he'd built. But I also knew that his success had been subsidized by my free labor in ways he'd never fully acknowledged, or perhaps even realized. "Where's Victoria?" he asked, looking around the kitchen as if expecting her to materialize. "Upstairs," I said. "She had some calls to make." Marcus nodded, accepting this explanation without question. Victoria always had calls to make, emails to send, or projects to work on. Her availability for family time had become increasingly sporadic over the years, but Marcus had adapted to this reality so gradually that he seemed to see it as normal. "And where are the kids?" he asked, starting to set the table without being asked, one of the few domestic tasks he consistently handled. "Jake is at Tommy's house working on some project, and Sophie is at her art class," I replied. "They'll both be back later tonight." "Right. I forgot about Sophie's class." Marcus paused in his table setting, looking slightly guilty. "I've been so busy with the Morrison account that I feel like I've lost track of everyone's schedules." "That's what I'm for," I said, and immediately regretted the words. They came out more bitter than I'd intended. Marcus looked up sharply. "Mom, are you okay? You seem off today." Before I could answer, Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway. She changed into casual clothes and styled her hair in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable. A calculated choice, I realized. Perfect timing, she said brightly, moving to kiss Marcus on the cheek. Eleanor made your favorite. The way she said it, as if she'd personally arranged for this treat to be prepared for him, made my jaw clench. But Marcus smiled and wrapped an arm around her waist. You two spoil me, he said, and I noticed he was looking at Victoria when he said it, even though I was the one who'd done all the actual spoiling. We sat down to dinner, and for the first few minutes the conversation followed its usual pattern. Marcus talked about his workday, Victoria shared updates about her latest marketing campaign, and I listened while serving and clearing dishes. It was a dynamic so established that it felt like a choreographed dance. But as the meal progressed, I became increasingly aware of how the conversation flowed around me without including me. Marcus and Victoria discussed weekend plans, upcoming social events, and decisions about the house, as if I were simply part of the furniture. When they mentioned repainting the guest bathroom, neither of them asked for my input, despite the fact that it was my house and I was the one who used that bathroom most often. Finally, during a lull in their conversation, I took a deep breath and said, Marcus, I need to talk to you about something important. Both Marcus and Victoria looked at me with surprise. Apparently, the idea that I might have something to contribute to the dinner conversation was unexpected. Of course, Mom, Marcus said, setting down his fork and giving me his full attention. What's on your mind? I glanced at Victoria, who was watching me with an expression of carefully controlled concern. She knew exactly what I was about to discuss. Well, I began, choosing my words carefully. Now that Jake and Sophie are heading to college in the fall, I've been thinking about some changes around here. Marcus nodded encouragingly. What kind of changes? The thing is, when you and Victoria first moved in, it was supposed to be temporary, just until you got established. And now, 25 years later, I let the sentence hang. Marcus's expression shifted from interest to confusion. Mom, what are you saying? I looked at Victoria again. Her face was a mask of patient understanding, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. I'm saying maybe it's time to revisit those original arrangements, I said carefully. You're both successful now. The children are grown. Maybe it's time for you to have your own place. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Our own place? He repeated slowly. Mom, this is our place. This is our home. It's my home, I said gently. My house. Marcus looked from me to Victoria and back again, clearly trying to process what was happening. Mom, I don't understand. Are you saying you want us to move out? The way he said it, with such bewilderment and hurt, made my chest tighten, but I pushed forward. I'm saying maybe it's time for everyone to have some independence, I said. You're adults. You don't need to live with your mother anymore. But we want to live with you, Marcus said, and the genuine confusion in his voice almost made me reconsider everything. Mom, you're family. This arrangement works for everyone. Why would we change it? Victoria reached across the table to take Marcus's hand, a gesture of solidarity that wasn't lost on me. I tried to talk to her about this earlier, Victoria said softly, her voice full of gentle concern. I think she's feeling a little lost now that the children are growing up and leaving. It's natural for women her age to go through this kind of transition. Women her age. There it was again. Transition? Marcus looked even more confused. Mom, what transition? What's really going on here? I felt trapped between my son's genuine bewilderment and Victoria's subtle manipulation. How could I explain 25 years of accumulated resentment without sounding petty? How could I make him understand that I'd become an unpaid employee in my own home without hurting his feelings? Marcus, I said carefully, I love you, and I love the children. But I'm 72 years old, and I've spent the last 25 years taking care of everyone else. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left taking care of myself. Marcus frowned. But Mom, we take care of each other. That's what families do. Do we? I asked. Take care of each other? Of course we do, Marcus said immediately. We're all here together, supporting each other, sharing responsibilities. What responsibilities do you share with me? I interrupted gently. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see him mentally reviewing the household dynamics, perhaps for the first time in years. Well, he said slowly, I handle all the major financial decisions about the house. I coordinate with contractors when we need repairs. I manage the insurance and property taxes. With my money, I said quietly. You manage my property taxes with my money. Marcus looked stricken. Mom, you never made it sound like that was a problem. I thought you appreciated not having to deal with those details. I did appreciate it, I said. But Marcus, I pay for everything. The mortgage was paid off years ago with my money. The taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the groceries, the household supplies. Everything comes from my accounts. What exactly are you contributing financially? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus looked at Victoria, then back at me. We contribute in other ways, Victoria said when Marcus didn't immediately respond. We help maintain the house. We handle the children's expenses. We provide companionship. You live here rent-free while I do all the housework and childcare, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. How is that helping me? Marcus looked genuinely shocked. Mom, you've never complained about any of this before. If you felt like the arrangement was unfair, why didn't you say something? Because I thought it was temporary. The words came out louder than I'd planned. 25 years ago, you said 6 months, maybe a year. I kept waiting for you to get your own place, and instead you got more and more settled here. But we are settled here, Marcus said, his voice rising to match mine. This is our home. The children grew up here. Our whole life is here. Your whole life is built on my foundation, I said. My house, my labor, my money. Victoria squeezed Marcus's hand tighter. Eleanor, I think you're oversimplifying a very complex family dynamic. Yes, you've been generous with your home and your time, but we've all contributed to making this family work. How? I asked directly. How have you contributed? Victoria's composure slipped slightly. I've raised 3 children while building a successful career. I've managed this household's social obligations, maintained relationships with extended family and friends, coordinated family events and celebrations. I've raised 3 children, I corrected. I did the night feedings, the school pickups, the homework help, the doctor's appointments, the daily care. You managed photo opportunities and took credit. That's not fair, Victoria said, her voice rising. I've been present for every important moment in my children's lives. Because I handled everything else so you could be. Marcus held up his hands. Stop. Both of you, just stop. He looked between us with an expression I'd never seen before, as if he was seeing his family dynamic clearly for the first time. Mom, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You feel like Victoria and I have been taking advantage of your generosity? I feel like I've been working as your unpaid housekeeper for 25 years, while you both built careers and took credit for the family life I created and maintained. The words hung in the air between us. Marcus stared at me, his face cycling through several emotions. Surprise, hurt, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. Mom, he said finally, if that's how you feel, then we need to fix it. We can renegotiate everything. We can start paying rent. We can hire a housekeeper so you don't have to do all the cleaning. We can. I don't want you to pay me to live in my house, I said. I want to live in my house. Alone. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. This one was charged with real understanding of what I was asking for. You want us to leave, Marcus said flatly. I want to reclaim my life. Marcus pushed back from the table and stood up, beginning to pace the kitchen. Mom, do you understand what you're asking? We'd have to find a new house, uproot the kids during their senior year of high school, completely reorganize our finances. The kids are going to college in the fall anyway, I pointed out. And you're both financially successful. You can afford your own place. Not like this, Victoria said. Not in this neighborhood. Not with these amenities. Eleanor, you'd be forcing us into a significant downgrade in our quality of life. You'd be living in a house you actually pay for, I replied. Like most adults do, quote, ... Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that was almost pleading. Mom, I don't understand where this is coming from. We're happy here. You seemed happy here. What changed? What changed is that I realized I'm 72 years old and I've never lived for myself, I said. I went from taking care of my husband to taking care of you to taking care of your family. I'd like to find out what it feels like to live for Eleanor before it's too late. But you'd be alone, Marcus said, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. Mom, what if something happens to you? What if you get sick or fall or need help? At least now you have family around. Family that sees me as the help, I said quietly. Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not true. That's not how we see you at all. Isn't it? I asked. When was the last time anyone asked what I wanted to do on a weekend instead of just assuming I'd be available to babysit or cook or clean? When was the last time you included me in a decision about the house instead of just informing me what you'd decided? When was the last time anyone in this family treated me like a person with my own desires instead of like a resource to be managed? The questions hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. Victoria cleared her throat. Eleanor, I think you're being incredibly unfair. We include you in everything. You're part of every family decision, every celebration, every important moment. I'm included as the person who makes everything possible, I said, not as someone whose opinion matters. Marcus sat back down heavily. Mom, if we've been taking you for granted, I'm sorry. I really am. But the solution isn't to blow up our entire family structure. The solution is to do better. How? I asked. How are you going to do better? Marcus and Victoria exchanged looks, and I could see them both scrambling for answers. We could hire help, Victoria said. A cleaning service. Maybe someone to help with cooking. So I can sit around and watch someone else do the work I've been doing for free? I asked. We could travel together more, Marcus suggested. Take family vacations. See the world. With whose money? I asked. And who would plan these trips, book the flights, pack for everyone, manage the logistics? Each suggestion they offered only highlighted how deeply they'd come to depend on my invisible labor. Finally, Victoria played what she clearly thought was her trump card. What about the children? She asked. Eleanor, Jake, and Sophie are about to start the most stressful period of their lives. College applications, final exams, graduation. They need stability right now. They need to know their home base is secure. You'd be traumatizing them at the worst possible time. The children will be fine, I said. They're strong, intelligent young adults. They'll adapt. But why should they have to? Victoria's voice was rising again. Why should we all have to sacrifice our stability and security because you're having some kind of midlife crisis? I'm 72, I said. If I'm having a midlife crisis, that means I'm planning to live to 144. You know what I mean, Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. You're making a rash decision based on emotions instead of logic. You're not thinking about the consequences for anyone else. I've spent 25 years thinking about the consequences for everyone else, I replied. Maybe it's time to think about the consequences for me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was different. Older, more serious. Mom, he said carefully, if this is really what you want, then we'll respect that. We'll start looking for our own place. But I need you to understand what you're asking for. This isn't just about living arrangements. You're asking us to completely restructure our lives, our finances, our family dynamics. And you're asking us to do it because you feel unappreciated. I'm asking you to do it because you're 49-year-old adults who shouldn't be living with your mother, I said. We're not living with our mother, Victoria said coldly. We're living as a family in our family home. Your family home that belongs to me. Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Fine. It's your house, but let's talk about what that really means, shall we? Something in her tone made me uneasy. What do you mean? I asked. Victoria smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. I mean, if you want to play the property ownership card, let's play it all the way. Who do you think has been paying for the upkeep of this property for the last 25 years? Who funded the renovations that doubled its value? Who's been maintaining the yard, handling repairs, managing contractors. Quote, You've been living here for free for 25 years, I said. Any improvements you made benefited you directly. And who's been taking care of the property owner? Victoria asked, her voice getting softer and more dangerous. Who's been making sure you're fed and clothed and not falling down the stairs in the middle of the night? Who's been your medical emergency contact? Who drives you to doctor's appointments when you can't drive yourself? I stared at her, realizing where this was going. Eleanor, Victoria continued, you're 72 years old. You're not as steady on your feet as you used to be. Your memory isn't what it was. Your vision is starting to go. Living alone in a house this size would be dangerous for someone in your condition. My condition? I repeated. We've all noticed the little slips, Victoria said, her tone now full of fake sympathy. The forgotten names, the missed appointments, the times you've seemed confused about what day it is. It's natural at your age, but it's also concerning. I felt my blood turn cold. She was making up medical problems to justify keeping me under their control. Marcus was looking between us with growing alarm. Victoria, what are you talking about? Mom seems fine to me. Of course she does, Victoria said smoothly. She's very good at covering for her limitations. But Marcus, think about it. Have you noticed that she's become more isolated? That she doesn't drive as much as she used to? That she relies on us more for basic tasks? Because I've been taking care of your family for 25 years, I said. I don't drive much, because I'm always here cooking and cleaning and managing your household. But I could see doubt creeping into Marcus's expression. Victoria was planting seeds of concern about my competence, my ability to live independently. Eleanor, Victoria said gently, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm trying to protect you. Living alone at your age, especially with some of the memory issues we've observed, would be dangerous. What if you fell? What if you forgot to turn off the stove? What if you had a medical emergency and no one was here to help? I'm fine, I said firmly. There's nothing wrong with my memory, and I'm perfectly capable of living alone. Victoria exchanged a look with Marcus that clearly said, See? This is exactly the kind of denial we're dealing with. Of course you feel that way, Victoria said soothingly. But sometimes we're not the best judges of our own limitations. That's why families need to look out for each other. I realized with growing horror that Victoria was trying to convince Marcus that I was mentally incompetent, that my desire for independence was actually evidence of cognitive decline. Marcus, I said urgently, you know there's nothing wrong with me. You know I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Marcus looked torn. Mom, I mean, you do seem fine to me, but if Victoria has been noticing things that I haven't been noticing things, Victoria said. We've been noticing things. The whole family has been concerned, but trying not to worry you unnecessarily. What things? I demanded. Give me one specific example. Victoria was ready for this. Last week, you forgot that Jake had moved his guitar lesson to Thursday. You made dinner for 5 people when Jake wasn't going to be here. Because you told me his lesson was on Wednesday, I protested. No, Eleanor. I specifically told you it had been moved to Thursday. We talked about it at breakfast. It was her word against mine, and I suddenly realized how helpless that made me. How many times over the years had she reminded me of things I was certain she'd never told me? How many times had she corrected my recollection of conversations or events? And 2 weeks ago, Victoria continued, you put salt in the coffee instead of sugar. When I mentioned it, you insisted you'd done it correctly. I remembered that morning. I'd been distracted by a phone call while making coffee, and I had accidentally used salt. But when Victoria mentioned it, I'd been embarrassed and defensive. Now she was twisting my embarrassment into evidence of memory problems. Everyone makes mistakes, I said weakly. Of course they do, Victoria agreed. But when someone your age starts making these kinds of mistakes more frequently, it can be a sign of bigger issues developing. Marcus was now looking at me with genuine concern. Mom, have you been feeling confused lately? Having trouble remembering things? No, I said. Marcus, I'm fine. She's manipulating you. Eleanor, Victoria said sadly, this kind of paranoid thinking is also concerning. When people start to lose cognitive function, they often blame others for their confusion. I stared at her in horror, realizing the trap she'd set. Any protest I made would be interpreted as further evidence of mental decline. Any anger I showed would be seen as emotional instability. She'd crafted a perfect catch-22. Victoria, I said carefully, you're lying. Victoria turned to Marcus with an expression of patient suffering. See what I mean? Marcus was now looking at me as if I were a stranger. Mom, why would Victoria lie about something like this? To keep me under control, I said. To keep me from asking you to move out. Eleanor, Victoria said gently, do you hear how that sounds? Do you really think I would make up medical concerns just to, what, keep living in your house? If we were concerned about finding our own place, we'd just look for our own place. We don't need to manufacture reasons to stay. But of course, they did need to manufacture reasons to stay. They'd built their entire comfortable lifestyle on my free labor and free housing. Without me, they'd have to pay for childcare, housework, and rent, costs that would significantly impact their quality of life. I looked at Marcus, trying to find some trace of the son who trusted me, who knew me, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Victoria had planted her seeds well. Marcus, I said desperately, you've known me your entire life. Do you really think I'm losing my mind? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Mom, he said finally, I think maybe we should all take some time to cool down. This has been a very emotional conversation, and maybe we're all saying things we don't mean. I mean every word I've said, I replied. I want my life back. Victoria stood up from the table. I think that's enough for tonight, she said firmly. Eleanor, you're clearly upset, and continuing this conversation while you're emotional isn't going to help anyone. She was dismissing me. In my own house, after my own dinner that I'd cooked, she was dismissing me like a child having a tantrum. I'm not emotional, I said. I'm clear-headed for the first time in 25 years. Of course you feel that way, Victoria said soothingly. But sometimes when we're dealing with stress or changes in our mental state, we can feel very certain about things that aren't actually realistic. Marcus stood up too. Mom, let's table this discussion for now. Maybe we can all think about it and talk again in a few days when everyone's had time to process. There's nothing to process, I said. I've made my decision. I want you to find your own place. Quote, ... We'll talk about it later, Marcus said firmly, clearly taking charge of the situation. Right now, I think we all need some space. They were managing me, both of them, treating me like a confused elderly person who needed to be humored and controlled. I watched them leave the kitchen together, murmuring in low voices as they headed upstairs. I was left alone with the dinner dishes and the devastating realization that Victoria had just successfully painted me as mentally incompetent in my own son's eyes. But as I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what might have been our last family dinner, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Victoria wasn't just entitled and manipulative, she was actively malicious. She was willing to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my son to protect her comfortable lifestyle. And that changed everything. If she wanted to play dirty, I was about to show her just how dirty a 72-year-old woman with nothing left to lose could play. What Victoria didn't know was that I'd spent 25 years learning exactly how her mind worked. And I'd also spent 25 years accumulating advantages she didn't know about. The gloves were about to come off. I spent that night lying awake in my small guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of my own house settling around me. Through the thin walls, I could hear Victoria and Marcus talking in low, urgent voices in what used to be my bedroom. I couldn't make out the words, but I could guess the content. Victoria was solidifying her narrative, reinforcing her concerns about my mental state, and positioning herself as the responsible daughter-in-law, trying to protect the family from my increasingly erratic behavior. By morning, I had made a decision. If Victoria wanted to wage psychological warfare, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. More importantly, I needed to start documenting everything to protect myself against her lies. I got up early and made breakfast as usual. Partly from habit, but mostly because I wanted to observe the family dynamics with fresh eyes. I needed to see clearly how the manipulation worked, how Victoria controlled the narrative, how Marcus had been conditioned to see her as the voice of reason. Victoria came downstairs first, dressed for another important day at her marketing firm. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, but I noticed she was watching me carefully, as if looking for signs of the instability she'd claimed to see. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said in that overly gentle tone people use with small children or confused elderly people. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I replied neutrally, not giving her anything to work with. "I'm glad," she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd prepared. "I was worried you might have trouble sleeping after our discussion last night." Our discussion. As if it had been a casual chat instead of her systematically destroying my credibility with my own son. Marcus appeared a few minutes later, and I watched carefully as Victoria immediately shifted into her supportive wife mode. She handed him his coffee, kissed his cheek, and began discussing his schedule for the day with the kind of detailed attention that made her seem like the perfect partner. "Don't forget you have the Henderson presentation at 2, she reminded him. "And I moved your dentist appointment to Thursday because I thought you might need more prep time for the Morrison contract meeting." Marcus smiled gratefully. "You're amazing. I don't know how you keep track of everything." I almost laughed. Victoria's amazing organizational skills consisted of having me manage everyone's actual daily needs, while she handled the high-level scheduling that made her look indispensable. "It's what partners do," Victoria said sweetly, then glanced at me with what looked like sympathy. "Eleanor, you seem tired this morning. Are you feeling all right?" There it was. The setup. Any sign of fatigue, distraction, or normal human variation would be interpreted as evidence of my declining condition. "I'm fine," I said firmly. "Of course," Victoria agreed quickly. "I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Maybe you should consider taking it easier today. I could pick up Jake and Sophie from their activities this afternoon." It was a trap. If I agreed, it would be evidence that I was admitting to limitations. If I refused, it could be spun as stubborn denial of my needs. "That's not necessary," I said. "I'm perfectly capable of handling the schedule I've been managing for 25 years. Victoria exchanged a quick look with Marcus, a look that clearly said, "See? Defensive and unreasonable." After they both left for work, I found myself alone in the house for the first time in months. The twins had already left for school, and I had several hours before I needed to start thinking about anyone else's needs. I used this time to do something I should have done years ago. I went through my own house like an investigator, looking for evidence of how completely Victoria had taken over my life. What I found was worse than I'd expected. In the kitchen, every appliance, every gadget, every organizational system reflected Victoria's preferences. The expensive espresso machine she'd insisted we needed. The specialized storage containers she'd bought for her various dietary supplements. The meal planning system she'd implemented that was so complex, it required a computer spreadsheet to manage. I realized that I'd been cooking in my own kitchen according to someone else's systems, using tools chosen by someone else, preparing meals planned around someone else's preferences. In the living room, I looked more carefully at the family photos Victoria had arranged so artfully. There were dozens of pictures of her with the children, Marcus with the children, family vacation shots, and formal portraits. But as I counted, I realized that I appeared in less than a quarter of them, and when I did appear, it was usually in the background or edges of group shots. The narrative told by these photos was clear. Victoria was the mother, Marcus was the father, and I was an auxiliary figure who sometimes appeared at family events. But it was in Victoria's home office that I found the most disturbing evidence of how she saw me and my role in the family. Victoria had always been meticulous about record keeping, and her filing system was extensive and well organized. I'd never had reason to look through her files before, but now I felt justified in understanding how she'd been representing our family situation to the outside world. What I found made my blood run cold. In a folder labeled Household Management, Victoria had detailed records going back years. There were spreadsheets tracking household expenses, maintenance schedules, and family activities. But what shocked me was how these records were organized. Every expense I'd paid, property taxes, utilities, groceries, household supplies, was listed under a column labeled Eleanor's contributions. But they weren't presented as my expenses for my own house. They were presented as contributions I was making to the family's collective expenses. More disturbing, Victoria had been tracking what she called Eleanor's care needs. This spreadsheet included entries like, forgot Jake's schedule change, increasing confusion about daily routines, and became defensive when reminded about salt/coffee mistake, possible early signs of cognitive decline. She'd been building a case. For months, possibly years, Victoria had been documenting every small mistake, every moment of distraction, every normal human error, and framing them as evidence of my mental deterioration. But the most shocking discovery was in a folder labeled Future Planning. Inside, I found printed emails between Victoria and Marcus discussing Mom's situation. The emails went back over a year, and they painted a picture of two people who had been planning for my inevitable decline, while I was completely unaware. I'm increasingly concerned about Mom's ability to live independently, Victoria had written in one email. Yesterday she seemed confused about what day Sophie's recital was, and last week she forgot that we'd already discussed changing the dinner time for Jake's game. I think we need to start preparing for the possibility that she'll need more supervised care. Marcus's response had been exactly what Victoria was hoping for. Do you think we should look into assisted living options? I hate the idea of Mom being in one of those places, but if it's becoming a safety issue... I don't think we're there yet, Victoria had replied, but I think we should start researching options so we're prepared. In the meantime, I think it's important that we maintain stability for her here. Any major changes to her routine or environment could accelerate the decline. I read that email 3 times before the full implications sank in. Victoria had been arguing that moving out of my house would be harmful to my mental health. She'd been positioning herself as my caregiver and protector, while simultaneously arguing that I needed the stability of the current arrangement. She'd been planning to keep me as a captive in my own home, using my supposed mental decline as justification. But the email that made me physically sick was one from just 2 weeks ago. I think it might be time to have a conversation with Mom about estate planning, Victoria had written. If her cognitive function is declining, we need to make sure there are proper legal protections in place. Maybe we should suggest she meet with a lawyer about updating her will and possibly setting up a power of attorney arrangement. Marcus had replied, "That makes sense. Should we suggest you as the power of attorney? You've been handling so much of her day-to-day care already. I think that would be the most natural arrangement," Victoria had agreed. I could transition gradually into handling more of her financial decisions as needed. It would provide continuity and reduce confusion for her. They were planning to take legal control of my life and my assets. Victoria was positioning herself to become my legal guardian, with the power to make all my decisions for me. I sat in Victoria's chair, in her office, in my house, reading emails about how they planned to strip away my autonomy, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure, cold rage. Not the hot anger of a moment's frustration, but the icy fury of someone who's been systematically betrayed by people they trusted. I printed copies of everything. Every email, every spreadsheet, every document that showed Victoria's real agenda. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. By the time Victoria came home from work that afternoon, I was back in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. "How was your day, Eleanor?" Victoria asked as she set down her purse and began her usual routine of checking her phone. "Productive," I said truthfully. "Good," Victoria said absently. "I hope you didn't overdo it. I know yesterday was stressful for you." "Stressful for me," as if I were the one who'd behaved badly. "Victoria," I said, continuing to chop vegetables for dinner, "I've been thinking about our conversation last night." Victoria's attention sharpened. "Oh? I think you might be right about some things," I said carefully. "Maybe I've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately." I could see Victoria's relief. She thought I was backing down, admitting weakness, accepting her narrative about my declining capabilities. "I'm so glad you can see that," Victoria said, moving closer. "Eleanor, I hope you know that everything I said came from a place of love and concern. We all just want what's best for you." "I know," I lied, "and I've been thinking that maybe I should talk to someone about it." Get some professional perspective. Victoria nodded eagerly. That's an excellent idea. I actually know a wonderful geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in age-related cognitive changes, Dr. Patterson. She's very gentle and understanding. Of course, Victoria already had a doctor picked out, probably one who would confirm her diagnosis of my supposed mental decline. That's very thoughtful, I said. But I was thinking more about talking to a lawyer. Victoria's face went very still. A lawyer? Why would you need a lawyer? Well, if I am starting to have some cognitive issues, shouldn't I make sure my legal affairs are in order? Update my will? Maybe look into power of attorney arrangements? Victoria's eyes lit up. This was exactly what she'd been hoping for. That's very wise thinking, she said. Very responsible. I'd be happy to help you find someone qualified to handle those kinds of arrangements. Actually, I said, I already have a lawyer. I called him today. Victoria's expression flickered. You called a lawyer today? James Whitmore, I said. He handled some legal work for James and me years ago. Lovely man. Very thorough. I see, Victoria said slowly. And what did you discuss with him? Estate planning, mostly, I said truthfully. Making sure everything is properly documented and legally sound. Victoria relaxed slightly. That's good. It's important to have these things in order. He's coming here tomorrow afternoon to go over some documents, I continued. I hope that's all right. I know you don't like strangers in the house. Of course it's all right, Victoria said. It's your house. It was the first time in years she'd acknowledged that fact, and I could see the words surprised her as soon as she said them. I might ask him about some other things too, I added casually. Property law, tenant rights, things like that. Victoria's smile became more forced. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Just trying to understand my options, I said. You know how confusing legal things can be for someone my age? I was giving her rope to hang herself with and she took it eagerly. Absolutely, Victoria agreed. Legal matters can be very complex, especially when you're dealing with stress or memory issues. You're smart to get professional help. That evening, Marcus came home to find Victoria in an unusually good mood. Over dinner, she cheerfully updated him on my progress. Eleanor had a very good day today, she reported, as if I weren't sitting right there. She's decided to take our advice about getting some professional support. Marcus looked pleased. That's great, Mom. What kind of support? I called a lawyer, I said, to help with estate planning. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's very responsible. It's good to have those things organized. He's coming tomorrow to review some documents and discuss my options, I added. Options for what? Marcus asked. Oh, various legal matters, I said vaguely. Property management, financial planning, that sort of thing. I could see Victoria calculating behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out if this development was good or bad for her plans. Maybe I should sit in on that meeting, she suggested. In case you need someone to help you understand the more complex legal concepts. That's very kind, I said. But I think I can manage. Of course you can, Victoria said quickly. I just meant, as backup. Sometimes lawyers use such complicated language. If I need help understanding something, I'll ask, I replied. Victoria's smile became tighter. Of course. I just want to make sure you're protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of your situation. My situation. As if my desire for independence were a medical condition that made me vulnerable to exploitation. The next morning, Victoria made a point of working from home. She claimed she had calls that required a quiet environment, but I knew she was really trying to monitor my meeting with the lawyer. James Whitmore arrived at exactly 2 p.m. He was older than I remembered, probably in his late 70s himself, but his eyes were sharp, and his handshake was firm. I'd known James peripherally for years through church and community functions, and I'd always respected his reputation for integrity. Eleanor, he said warmly, it's good to see you again. I was sorry to hear about your call yesterday. It sounds like you're dealing with some complex family situation. That's one way to put it, I said, leading him into the living room. Victoria appeared almost immediately, drawn by the sound of voices. Oh, you must be the lawyer, she said. extending her hand with her most charming smile. I'm Victoria, Eleanor's daughter-in-law. I help coordinate her appointments and legal matters. James looked from Victoria to me with raised eyebrows. I see. Eleanor, would you prefer to have this conversation privately, or would you like Mrs. Chen Morrison? Victoria supplied. Would you like Mrs. Chen Morrison to join us? I think we should start privately, I said. Victoria, would you mind giving us some space? Victoria's smile became strained. Of course. I'll be in my office if you need anything. After Victoria reluctantly left the room, James settled into his chair and pulled out a legal pad. Now then, he said, tell me what's really going on. I took a deep breath and began to tell him everything. The 25 years of escalating exploitation, Victoria's manipulation tactics, the medical gaslighting, the plans to gain power of attorney, the complete takeover of my home and my life. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor, he said finally, these are very serious allegations. If what you're telling me is accurate, you're describing a pattern of financial and psychological abuse. Is that what this is? I asked. Abuse? Living rent-free in someone's home for 25 years while forcing them to provide unpaid domestic labor? Making false claims about their mental competence to maintain control? Planning to gain legal guardianship over a competent adult? Yes, I'd say that qualifies as abuse. Hearing it labeled so clearly was both validating and devastating. I'd been abused for 25 years by people I'd loved and trusted. What are my options? I asked. James consulted his notes. Well, first, let's establish that you are the sole owner of this property, correct? Yes. James and I bought it together, but when he died, it became mine outright. And there are no written lease agreements or rental contracts with your son and daughter-in-law? None. It was supposed to be temporary. And you've never been formally diagnosed with any cognitive impairment or mental health condition that would affect your competency? No. I had a complete physical last month. My doctor said I'm in excellent health for my age. James made more notes. In that case, your options are quite straightforward, albeit potentially difficult emotionally. As the property owner, you have the legal right to terminate their occupancy with proper notice. In this state, that means 30 days written notice for month-to-month tenants, which is effectively what they are. I can evict them? You can require them to leave, yes. The question is whether you want to handle this as a family matter or a legal matter. I thought about Victoria's files, her plans to gain control over my life, her willingness to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my son. What's the difference? A family matter would involve giving them notice privately and hoping they comply voluntarily. A legal matter would involve formal eviction proceedings, which become part of the public record and can affect someone's ability to rent in the future. And if they refuse to leave voluntarily, then it becomes a legal matter whether you want it to or not. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about Marcus and how this would affect him. Despite everything, I didn't want to hurt my son. There's something else you should consider, James continued. Based on what you've told me about Mrs. Chen Morrison's documentation of your supposed cognitive decline, I suspect she may try to challenge your competency if you move forward with this. What do you mean? I mean, she may try to have you declared mentally incompetent to prevent you from making decisions about your own property. It's a common tactic in cases like this. The thought made my stomach turn. Could she do that? She could try, but based on our conversation today, and with proper medical documentation of your competency, I don't think she'd be successful. However, the process itself can be traumatic and expensive. So, what do you recommend? James leaned back in his chair. Eleanor, I've been practicing law for 45 years, and I've seen situations like this more often than you might think. Adult children who gradually take over their aging parents' lives, often with the best of intentions initially, but eventually becoming exploitative. He paused, studying my face. The question you need to ask yourself is, what do you want the outcome to be? Do you want them out of your house? Do you want to maintain a relationship with your son? Do you want to protect yourself from future manipulation? Do you want justice for what's been done to you? I want my life back, I said without hesitation. And I want to make sure Victoria can never do this to anyone else. James nodded slowly. Then I think we need to be strategic about this. We need to protect you legally, document everything thoroughly, and be prepared for Victoria to escalate her tactics when she realizes you're serious. What do you mean, escalate? Eleanor, people who engage in this kind of long-term manipulation don't give up easily when their control is threatened. I suspect Mrs. Chen Morrison is going to fight very hard to maintain the lifestyle she's built on your generosity. How hard? James looked at me seriously. Hard enough that you're going to need all the protection and documentation we can provide. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? I thought about Victoria's files, her lies about my mental state, her plans to gain legal control over my life. I thought about 25 years of invisible labor and emotional manipulation. I thought about the possibility of spending my remaining years as a prisoner in my own home. Mr. Whitmore, I said, it's already ugly. I'm ready to make it official. What I didn't know was that Victoria had been listening at the door, and she'd heard enough to realize that her comfortable world was about to come crashing down. The war was about to begin in earnest, and Victoria was already planning her first strike. The morning after my meeting with James Whitmore, I woke up to find Victoria already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. This was unusual. Victoria typically left for work before I got up, leaving me to handle the morning routine for Jake and Sophie. But there she was at 6:30 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a cup of coffee that she'd clearly made herself. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said without looking up from her screen. "I hope you slept well." There was something different in her tone, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. I realized that she must have overheard more of my conversation with James than I'd hoped. "Fine, thank you," I replied, moving toward the coffee maker she'd already used. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day," Victoria continued, still focused on her laptop, "about your feelings of being unappreciated." I poured my coffee and waited, sensing that something important was coming. "I realize I may not have been as clear as I should have been about how much we value your contributions to this family," Victoria said, finally looking up at me. "So I've been doing some research." She turned her laptop screen toward me. On it was a detailed spreadsheet with multiple columns and color-coded entries. "What is this?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "It's a comprehensive analysis of our household economy," Victoria said, with the tone of someone presenting a business proposal. "I spent most of last night putting this together because I realized we've never properly quantified the value exchange in our living arrangement." I moved closer to look at the screen, and what I saw made my blood pressure spike. The spreadsheet was titled Morrison Household Value Analysis, and it contained columns for services provided, market value, and annual contribution. Victoria had listed every aspect of our household functioning and assigned dollar amounts to each. Under Eleanor's contributions, she'd listed things like meal preparation, $8,000 annually, light housekeeping, $6,000 annually, childcare assistance, $5,000 annually, transportation services, $3,000 annually. The total came to $22,000 per year. But under Marcus and Victoria's contributions, the numbers were staggering. Housing provided to Eleanor, $36,000 annually, calculated as market rate rent for private room with full house privileges. Utilities and household expenses, $8,000 annually. Home maintenance and improvements, $15,000 annually. Transportation and vehicle maintenance, $6,000 annually. Healthcare coordination and emergency support, $12,000 annually. Social and emotional support, $10,000 annually. Their total contribution came to $87,000 annually. I stared at the screen in disbelief. "Victoria, what is this supposed to prove?" "It's supposed to prove that this family operates as a partnership, where everyone contributes according to their abilities," Victoria said smoothly. "And it demonstrates that you're actually receiving significantly more value than you're providing." "Housing provided to Eleanor?" I repeated. "This is my house." "Yes, but Eleanor, you have to think about this practically. If you were living alone, you'd still be paying property taxes, utilities, insurance, and maintenance costs, but you'd be paying them on the full property value, not just your proportional share. My proportional share of my own house? Victoria's expression was patient but condescending. Eleanor, 3 adults and 2 children live in this house. That means you're benefiting from having your living costs shared among 5 people instead of bearing them alone. That's a significant economic advantage. I was speechless. Victoria had somehow calculated that I was receiving a favor by allowing my family to live rent-free in my house. Plus, Victoria continued, there's the value of the home improvements we've funded over the years. The kitchen renovation alone added $50,000 to the property value. The master bathroom, the finished basement, the landscaping. We've invested over $200,000 in improvements to this property. Improvements that you wanted. In a house you were living in for free. Improvements that benefited the entire household and significantly increased your net worth, Victoria corrected. Eleanor, when we moved in, this house was worth approximately $180,000. Today, it's worth over $450,000. The majority of that increase is due to the improvements we funded. I realized what she was doing. Victoria was trying to rewrite the entire history of our arrangement to make it seem like I was the one who had been taking advantage of them. But that's not all, Victoria continued, clicking to another tab on her spreadsheet. I've also calculated the value of the support services we provide. This tab was even more insulting than the first. Victoria had assigned monetary values to basic human decency and family relationships. Emergency medical support and healthcare coordination. Marcus and Victoria serve as Eleanor's emergency contacts, manage medical appointments, and provide transportation to healthcare facilities when needed. Social and emotional support. Marcus and Victoria ensure Eleanor has daily social interaction, include her in family activities, and provide emotional stability during her adjustment to aging. Financial planning and management assistance. Victoria helps coordinate Eleanor's household expenses, manages vendor relationships, and provides guidance on major purchases. Home security and maintenance oversight. Marcus and Victoria handle all major maintenance decisions, coordinate with contractors, and ensure the property is secure when Eleanor travels or is incapacitated. Every single item was either something I didn't need or something that primarily benefited them while they claimed it was for my sake. Victoria, I said carefully, this analysis is fundamentally flawed. How so? Because it's based on the premise that I need to be taken care of, and that you're doing me favors by living in my house. Victoria's smile was sympathetic but firm. Eleanor, I understand that it might be difficult to accept, but the reality is that at your age, living independently would be both expensive and potentially dangerous. We're not just providing housing to you, you're providing housing to us. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Then why haven't you ever paid rent? Because we've been contributing in other ways that are equally valuable. This spreadsheet proves that. I stared at her, marveling at the audacity. She'd created an elaborate financial justification for 25 years of freeloading, and she was presenting it as if it were objective analysis rather than self-serving manipulation. I don't agree with your calculations, I said. Victoria nodded as if she'd expected this response. I understand that numbers can be confusing, especially when you're dealing with stress and memory issues. That's actually something else I wanted to talk to you about. She clicked to another tab, and I saw a new spreadsheet titled, Eleanor's Care Needs Assessment. I've been tracking some concerning patterns in your behavior over the past few months, Victoria said gently. I think it's important that we address them before they become more serious. This spreadsheet was a detailed log of every mistake I'd made, every moment of confusion, every sign of normal human fallibility, going back over a year. But Victoria had framed each entry as evidence of cognitive decline. March 15th. Eleanor forgot that Jake's soccer practice was moved to Thursday. Became defensive when reminded. Possible early signs of memory issues. April 3rd. Eleanor put laundry detergent in the dishwasher instead of dishwasher soap. Claimed she remembered doing it correctly. Increasing confusion about household routines. April 20th. Eleanor seemed disoriented when asked about dinner plans for Sophie's birthday. Required multiple reminders about the restaurant reservation. Short-term memory appears to be declining. May 8th. Eleanor became agitated when unable to remember the name of Jake's girlfriend. Accused family members of not telling her information she had been told repeatedly. Each entry included a date, description, and assessment of what it might indicate about my mental state. Victoria had been building a case against my competency for over a year. Victoria, this is completely inappropriate, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You've been spying on me and documenting normal human mistakes as if they were symptoms of dementia. Eleanor, I understand you're upset, but this kind of defensive reaction is actually consistent with early-stage cognitive decline. Patients often become paranoid and accuse family members of plotting against them. Because you are plotting against me. Victoria's expression became even more sympathetic. I know it feels that way to you, and I'm sure that's very frightening. But Eleanor, we're not plotting against you. We're trying to help you. She clicked to yet another tab, Recommended Interventions. I've researched the best ways to support someone in your situation, Victoria continued. The key is maintaining stability and routine while gradually introducing more support as needed. The list of interventions read like a plan to strip away every aspect of my independence. Gradually transition household financial management to Victoria to reduce Eleanor's stress and confusion about bills and expenses. Implement medication management system to ensure Eleanor takes prescriptions correctly and on schedule. Coordinate with Eleanor's healthcare providers to ensure proper monitoring of cognitive function. Establish clear daily routines and structure to minimize confusion and agitation. Consider respite care options for times when family members need to travel for work. Respite care, I asked? Short-term professional care to give the family a break from caregiving responsibilities, Victoria explained. It's very common in situations like this. Situations like what? I don't need caregiving. Victoria's smile was patient but pitying. Eleanor, yesterday you told the lawyer that you wanted to evict your own family from your house. You don't see how that might indicate some confusion about your best interests. And there it was. My meeting with James Whitmore wasn't a sign that I was taking control of my life. According to Victoria, it was evidence that I was making irrational decisions due to mental decline. My meeting with Mr. Whitmore was about estate planning, I said carefully. Yes, and I think that's wonderful that you're thinking about these things, Victoria agreed. But Eleanor, some of the questions you were asking him suggest you might be confused about the legal and financial realities of your situation. What questions? Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like notes. Well, according to what I overheard, you were asking about eviction procedures and tenant rights. Eleanor, we're not tenants. We're family members who live here by mutual agreement. Mutual agreement that was supposed to be temporary. Agreements can evolve, Victoria said reasonably, and they have to take into account changing circumstances. 25 years ago, you were a healthy woman in her late 40s. Today, you're a 72-year-old woman with increasing care needs. The arrangement that made sense then might not be practical now. I don't have increasing care needs. Eleanor, you just spent an hour yesterday asking a lawyer about how to kick your family out of your house. If that's not evidence of confusion about what's in your best interests, I don't know what is. The circular logic was maddening. Any action I took to assert my independence was interpreted as proof that I needed to be controlled. I want you and Marcus to find your own place, I said firmly. This isn't a medical decision. It's a personal choice. Victoria nodded sympathetically. I understand that you feel that way. But Eleanor, people with cognitive decline often fixate on ideas that seem logical to them, but aren't practical in reality. It's very common. Stop diagnosing me. You're not a doctor. You're absolutely right, Victoria agreed. I'm not a doctor. That's why I think it's important that you see one. She pulled out a business card and placed it on the table in front of me. This is Dr. Patricia Hendricks. She's a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in cognitive assessments for older adults. I've already called her office and explained the situation. She has an opening this Friday. I stared at the card. You made me a doctor's appointment without asking me? I made an appointment that you're free to keep or cancel, Victoria corrected. But Eleanor, given some of the concerning behaviors we've observed, I think it would be wise to get a professional evaluation. What concerning behaviors? Victoria consulted her phone again. Well, in addition to the memory issues I've documented, there's been some personality changes. Increased irritability, suspicious thinking, unrealistic planning. These can all be early signs of dementia or other age-related cognitive changes. Unrealistic planning? Eleanor, you're 72 years old and you want to live alone in a 4,000 square foot house. You want to handle all the cooking, cleaning, maintenance, and daily management by yourself? Does that really sound realistic to you? Put that way, it did sound overwhelming. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I being unrealistic? Was I taking on more than I could handle? Then I remembered that I'd been handling all those responsibilities for 25 years, while also taking care of 4 other people. I've been managing this house and everyone in it for 25 years, I said. I think I can manage just myself. Victoria's expression became concerned. But Eleanor, you haven't been managing it alone. We've all been helping. Marcus handles all the major financial decisions and maintenance coordination. I manage the family schedule and social obligations. The children help with yard work and household tasks. You've had a full support system. Support system? I laughed bitterly. Victoria, I do the cooking, cleaning, laundry, shopping, and childcare. What exactly have you been helping with? Eleanor, I handle all the complex logistics that you might not think about. Coordinating with contractors, managing insurance claims, scheduling maintenance, dealing with utility companies, plus all the social and emotional support that's required to maintain family relationships. She was doing it again, rewriting history to make her minimal contributions sound essential, while dismissing my actual labor as simple tasks that anyone could do. And, Victoria continued, I've been increasingly taking over responsibilities that you used to handle but that have become difficult for you. Like what? Like managing the household calendar. You used to keep track of everyone's schedules, but I've noticed you've been missing appointments and getting confused about timing. So I've gradually taken over that responsibility. Because you kept changing things without telling me. Eleanor, I think you might be misremembering some of those conversations. It's very common for people with memory issues to think they weren't told things when they were actually informed but forgot. The gaslighting was so smooth, so consistent, that I could see how someone might begin to doubt their own memories. If I hadn't found Victoria's files documenting her deliberate strategy, I might have started believing her myself. I want to see Dr. Hendricks alone, I said finally. Victoria looked surprised. Alone? Eleanor, I think it would be helpful for me to be there to provide context about the concerning behaviors we've observed. No. If I'm going to be evaluated, I want it to be based on my actual condition, not your interpretation of my behavior. Victoria's mask slipped slightly. Eleanor, patients with cognitive decline often don't have accurate insight into their own limitations. Having a family member present helps ensure the doctor gets complete information. The doctor can get complete information by examining me herself. But what if you forget to mention important symptoms? What if you're not aware of some of the changes we've observed? Then the doctor will discover that during her examination. Victoria was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating how to respond to this unexpected resistance. Of course you have the right to see the doctor alone if that's what you prefer, she said finally. I just hope you'll be completely honest with her about the memory issues and confusion you've been experiencing. I'll be completely honest about my actual experiences, I said. Not your interpretation of them. Victoria stood up from the table, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. Eleanor, I hope you know that everything I'm doing comes from a place of love and concern for your well-being. I understand that it's difficult to accept that you might need more help than you used to, but denying reality doesn't make it go away. You're right, I said. Denying reality doesn't make it go away. Victoria paused, perhaps hearing something in my tone that made her uneasy. What do you mean by that? I mean that the reality of our situation is becoming very clear to me, I said. And I don't think it's the reality you've been trying to create. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out how much I actually knew and how much of a threat I represented to her carefully constructed narrative. Eleanor, she said finally, I think this conversation has been very productive. It's clear that you're dealing with a lot of stress and confusion right now. I hope the appointment with Dr. Hendricks will help provide some clarity for all of us. With that, she picked up her laptop and headed toward the stairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the devastating realization of how thoroughly she'd been planning to destroy my autonomy. But as I sat there, I found myself thinking about something James Whitmore had said. People who engage in this kind of long-term manipulation don't give up easily when their control is threatened. Victoria wasn't just trying to convince me that I was mentally incompetent. She was building a legal case to have me declared incompetent. The doctor's appointment, the documented concerning behaviors, the financial analysis showing I was dependent on their care, it was all part of a strategy to strip away my legal right to make decisions about my own life. I realized that Friday's appointment with Dr. Hendricks wasn't going to be a routine checkup. It was going to be the first battle in a war for my freedom. And Victoria had no idea that I was going to be prepared for it. Gee. What she didn't know was that I had my own documentation now. Copies of her files, evidence of her manipulation, and a lawyer who understood exactly what she was trying to do. Victoria thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to find out that I'd been watching her moves for 25 years, and I'd finally learned how to play her game. The difference was, I was playing for my life and my freedom. She was just playing to keep her comfortable lifestyle. And I was about to show her which motivation was stronger. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to match the atmosphere in the house. Victoria had taken the day off work to drive me to my appointment with Dr. Hendricks, ostensibly to be supportive, but really to make sure I didn't say anything that contradicted her carefully constructed narrative about my declining mental state. "I've prepared some notes for Dr. Hendricks," Victoria announced over breakfast, pulling out a manila folder thick with documentation. "Just in case you forget to mention some of the concerning incidents we've discussed." I looked at the folder and smiled calmly. "That's very thorough of you." What Victoria didn't know was that I'd spent the previous evening preparing my own documentation with James Whitmore. Hidden in my purse was a folder containing copies of all Victoria's files, her emails planning to gain power of attorney, her fabricated evidence of my cognitive decline, and a letter from my primary care physician confirming my excellent mental and physical health. The drive to Dr. Hendricks' office was tense. Victoria kept making comments designed to demonstrate my supposed confusion. "Now, Eleanor, remember we discussed that Dr. Hendricks specializes in memory issues?" she said as we pulled into the parking lot. "Don't be embarrassed if she asks you some questions that seem basic. That's just part of the assessment process." "I understand," I replied evenly. "And try to be honest about the memory problems you've been having. I know it's difficult to admit, but denial won't help anyone." "I'll be completely honest," I assured her. Dr. Hendricks' office was in a modern medical building, and the waiting room was designed to be calming with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. Victoria immediately approached the receptionist. "We're here for Eleanor Morrison's appointment," she announced. "I'm her daughter-in-law, Victoria Chen Morrison. I spoke with your office earlier this week about the concerning behaviors we've been observing." The receptionist smiled professionally. "Of course. Dr. Hendricks will see Mrs. Morrison shortly. Will you be joining the appointment?" "Yes, I have documentation that will be helpful for the doctor's assessment," Victoria said, holding up her folder. "Actually," I said firmly, "I'd prefer to see Dr. Hendricks alone initially." Victoria's smile became strained. "Eleanor, we discussed this. It would be helpful for me to provide context about the incidents I've observed. And I'm sure Dr. Hendricks will invite you in if she feels it's necessary," I replied. "But I'd like to start with a private consultation." The receptionist looked between us diplomatically. "Dr. Hendricks typically begins with private patient consultations anyway. Mrs. Chen Morrison, you're welcome to wait here, and the doctor will let you know if she'd like to speak with you." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "I see. Well, Eleanor, please make sure you tell Dr. Hendricks about the memory issues we've discussed. It's important that she has complete information." "I'll tell her everything that's relevant," I said. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Dr. Hendricks' office, and within the first 5 minutes, I knew that Victoria had made a critical error in her choice of doctors. Dr. Patricia Hendricks was not the compliant professional Victoria had expected. She was sharp, experienced, and clearly skeptical of family members who were overly eager to have their relatives declared incompetent. Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Hendricks said after completing her initial assessment, I have to say, your daughter-in-law seemed very concerned about your mental state when she called to schedule this appointment. But frankly, I'm not seeing any evidence of cognitive impairment. What kind of concerns did she express? I asked. Dr. Hendricks consulted her notes. Memory problems, confusion about daily activities, poor judgment about living arrangements, and what she called, quote, unrealistic planning. She also mentioned that you'd been making accusations against family members and showing signs of paranoid thinking. Doctor, I brought some documentation that I think you should see. I opened my folder and handed her copies of Victoria's files, the spreadsheets tracking my supposed decline, the emails planning to gain power of attorney, the financial analysis designed to prove I was dependent on their care. Dr. Hendricks read through the documents with growing alarm. Mrs. Morrison, what I'm seeing here isn't evidence of your cognitive decline. This appears to be systematic documentation designed to create a false narrative about your mental competence. That's what I suspected. Have you been experiencing any of the memory problems or confusion described in these notes? No more than any normal person my age. But Dr. Hendricks, I think it's important you understand the context. My son and daughter-in-law have been living in my house rent-free for 25 years. When I recently told them I wanted them to find their own place, Victoria began claiming I was mentally incompetent. Dr. Hendricks frowned. Mrs. Morrison, what you're describing sounds like psychological abuse designed to maintain financial control over your living situation. Is that your professional opinion? Based on what I'm seeing here, yes. The pattern of behavior you're describing, gaslighting, false documentation of mental decline, threats to have you declared incompetent. These are classic tactics used to maintain control over elderly family members. Dr. Hendricks spent the next hour conducting a thorough cognitive assessment. I completed memory tests, reasoning exercises, and psychological evaluations. When she was finished, she sat back in her chair with a definitive expression. Mrs. Morrison, you are cognitively intact, mentally competent, and fully capable of making your own decisions about your living arrangements and finances. In fact, your test scores are above average for someone your age. Will you put that in writing? Absolutely. And Mrs. Morrison, I'm also going to recommend that you consider reporting this situation to Adult Protective Services. What you've described constitutes elder abuse. I have a lawyer handling the legal aspects, I assured her. But I would very much appreciate a written assessment of my mental competence. When I returned to the waiting room an hour and a half later, Victoria was pacing anxiously. She immediately approached me with fake concern. How did it go? Was Dr. Hendricks able to help clarify some of the issues we've been concerned about? It was very clarifying, I said truthfully. Did she want to speak with me about the incidents I've documented? She said that wouldn't be necessary. Victoria's face fell. Oh, well, what did she recommend for treatment? She recommended that I continue living independently and making my own decisions about my life. Victoria stared at me for a moment, clearly processing that her plan had failed spectacularly. I see, she said finally. Well, I suppose we should head home then. The drive back was silent, except for Victoria's occasional attempts to downplay the significance of Dr. Hendricks' assessment. You know, one doctor's opinion isn't necessarily definitive, she said as we pulled into the driveway. If we're still concerned about some of the behaviors we've observed, we could always get a second opinion. Victoria, I said calmly, there won't be a second opinion because there won't be a need for one. We went into the house to find Marcus waiting in the living room with Jake and Sophie. Victoria had clearly called a family meeting for Guther after my appointment, expecting to present Dr. Hendricks' diagnosis of my incompetence as justification for their continued control over my life. How did the doctor visit go, Mom? Marcus asked with genuine concern. Very well, I replied. Dr. Hendricks confirmed that I'm mentally competent and fully capable of making my own decisions. Marcus looked confused. But Victoria said she'd been observing some concerning behaviors. Marcus, I said, settling into my favorite chair, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's really been happening in this house. I pulled out my folder and began spreading documents across the coffee table. Victoria's face went white as she recognized her own files. What are those? Marcus asked. These are documents I found in Victoria's office, I said calmly. They detail her plan to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could gain power of attorney over my finances and property. Marcus picked up one of Victoria's spreadsheets. Victoria, what is this? Eleanor went through my private files, Victoria said defensively. She had no right to. I went through files about myself in my own house, I corrected. Files documenting fabricated evidence of my mental decline. I handed Marcus the emails between him and Victoria planning my future. I watched his face change as he read his own words about putting me in assisted living and giving Victoria power of attorney. Marcus, I said gently, did you really think I was becoming mentally incompetent? Marcus looked up from the emails with confusion and growing horror. Mom, Victoria said she was noticing some concerning changes, and I trusted her judgment because she spends more time with you than I do. What changes? I asked. Marcus looked at Victoria, then back at me. She said you were forgetting conversations, getting confused about schedules, making mistakes with basic tasks. Did you personally observe any of these things? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted. I was trusting Victoria's reports. I turned to Jake and Sophie, who had been listening with growing shock. Kids, have either of you noticed me becoming forgetful or confused? No, Grandma, Sophie said immediately. You remember everything better than anyone else in this family. You literally have our entire lives organized in your head, Jake added. I don't understand what Aunt Victoria is talking about. Victoria's composure was cracking completely. Eleanor, you're taking those documents out of context. I was just trying to be prepared for potential future needs. You were building a case to have me declared incompetent, I said firmly, so you could maintain control over my house and continue living here rent-free. That's not true, Victoria protested. Everything I've done has been out of concern for your well-being. I pulled out Dr. Hendrick's written assessment. According to a qualified geriatric psychiatrist, I am mentally competent and fully capable of independent living. She also said that your behavior constitutes psychological abuse. The room fell silent. Marcus was staring at Victoria as if seeing her for the first time. Victoria, he said slowly, did you really document Mom's supposed mental decline to build a case for power of attorney? Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. Marcus, you don't understand how precarious our situation is. If Eleanor really makes us move out, where are we supposed to go? We can't afford anything comparable to this house. Our entire life is built around this arrangement. Our life is built around Mom's generosity, Marcus corrected, his voice hard. Mom has let us live in her house rent-free for 25 years, while she took care of our children and managed our household. I was managing our household, Victoria snapped. I was coordinating contractors, handling logistics, managing schedules. You were managing the schedules that Mom executed, Marcus said, clearly seeing the situation with new eyes. Mom did all the actual work. Victoria turned desperate. Marcus, you can't seriously be considering throwing away 25 years of family stability because Eleanor is having some kind of midlife crisis. I'm 72, I interjected, and it's not a crisis. It's a decision. Victoria whirled on me. Fine. You want us out? We'll leave. But don't expect us to pretend this is fair or reasonable. You're destroying this family because you're too selfish to appreciate what we've built together. What you've built, I said calmly, was built on my foundation, with my labor, in my house. Victoria grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I can't listen to any more of this. Marcus, when you come to your senses, I'll be at my sister's house. After Victoria stormed out, Marcus sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. Mom, he said finally, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Victoria was manipulating the situation like this. I know you didn't, I said gently. She's very good at manipulation, but I should have seen it. I should have questioned what she was telling me about your mental state. Marcus, you trusted your wife. That's not a character flaw. Jake and Sophie were looking between us with confusion. Are we really moving out? Sophie asked. Yes, I said firmly, but that doesn't mean we won't be a family anymore. It just means we'll be a family where everyone lives in their own homes. But where will we go? Jake asked. And what about college? What about, your father is a successful businessman, I said. You'll figure it out. And kids, this doesn't change how much I love you or how proud I am of you both. Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I don't know how to make this right. You start by understanding that there's nothing to make right, I said. You're adults. It's time for you to have your own home. It should have happened 20 years ago. Over the next month, Marcus and Victoria found a house in a nice neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Victoria barely spoke to me during the moving process, communicating only through Marcus when absolutely necessary. On their last day in my house, Victoria made one final attempt at manipulation. Eleanor, she said, standing in my kitchen with boxes around her, I hope you're prepared for how lonely this is going to be. This house is going to feel very empty and quiet. I'm looking forward to the quiet, I replied honestly. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency? What if I finally get to live for myself for the first time in 25 years? I interrupted. Victoria, I'll be fine. She stared at me for a moment, and I could see her finally accepting that her comfortable life was over. This is a mistake, she said. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret, I said, is that it took me so long to realize what was happening. After they moved out, the house felt different immediately. Not empty or lonely as Victoria had predicted, but peaceful. For the first time in 25 years, I could walk through my own home without encountering someone else's schedule, someone else's priorities, someone else's demands on my time and energy. I redecorated the master bedroom and moved back into it. I rearranged the kitchen to suit my preferences. I hung my own artwork on the walls. I turned Victoria's office into a reading room with a comfortable chair and good lighting. Jake and Sophie visit regularly, and our relationship has actually improved now that I'm not their daily caregiver, but can enjoy them as my grandchildren. Marcus comes by every Sunday for dinner, and we're rebuilding our relationship on healthier ground. Victoria and I have no relationship at all, which suits me perfectly. 6 months after they moved out, I got a call from James Whitmore. Eleanor, he said, I have some interesting news. Victoria has been trying to find a lawyer willing to challenge your competency and contest your decision to evict them from the house. Any luck? I asked. None whatsoever. James replied with satisfaction, especially after I shared Dr. Hendricks's assessment and the documentation of Victoria's manipulation tactics with the 3 lawyers she consulted. Word gets around in the legal community about people who try to abuse the system. Good, I said. There's something else, James continued. Victoria has been telling people around town that you're suffering from dementia and that you made an irrational decision to kick your family out of their home. I laughed. Let her talk. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with me can see that's not true. Indeed. In fact, I've been recommending you to other clients who need help with similar family situations. You've become something of an inspiration for people dealing with manipulative adult children. A year later, I'm 73 years old and living exactly the life I want. I travel when I feel like it. I paint in the afternoons. I read until late at night without worrying about anyone else's schedule. I've reconnected with old friends and made new ones. Most importantly, I learned something crucial. It's never too late to reclaim your life from people who've been taking advantage of your kindness. Victoria was wrong about one thing. I don't regret my decision at all. The only thing I regret is that I waited so long to make it. And every morning when I wake up in my own bedroom, in my own house, with my own day stretching ahead of me to fill as I choose, I remember her laughing when I said I was leaving. She thought a 72-year-old woman would be too weak, too scared, too dependent to stand up for herself. She was very, very wrong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. And I am finally, completely, gloriously free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.